Hello there, welcome to another episode of The True Gamer Top 10. In this Top 10, we're going to talk about the top 10 worst, most terrible fighting games of all time. That's right, the top 10 worst fighting video games in the fighting game genre. Alright, number 1. Sonic the Fighters came out in arcade in 1996. With the proven popularity of fighting games by the mid-90s, even Sonic got his own version of Virtua Fighter. Unfortunately, this was just another addition to the already increasing and disappointing Sonic titles of 1996. The game featured familiar characters from the Sonic games such as Tails, Knuckles, Amy Rose, and Dr. Eggman, but it was so poorly received because of simplistic gameplay and outdated presentation. The combat engine felt like a watered-down version of Virtua Fighter 2, and the game never even got a release on the Sega Saturn, which was Sega's current-gen console at the time. Sonic the Fighters was eventually re-released 9 years later for the GameCube and PS2 as part of the Sonic Gems collection. With crappy moves, terrible polygonal graphics, and an overall outdated style even by 1996 standards, Sonic the Fighters was so terrible it never even made a spark despite being part of the popular Sonic franchise. What a pathetic release. Number 2. Soul Calibur came out on the Dreamcast in 1999. Although initially released in 98 for arcades, the Dreamcast port of Soul Calibur was exceptionally bad for having crappier graphics, useless features such as team battle, survival, and training mode. It barely had new costumes for the characters included, or any sort of additional modes that could have actually improved the gameplay. But really, Soul Calibur felt more like a failed fighting experiment on the doomed Dreamcast system. Cervantes, the only new character that they really added since the arcade edition, was a generic crappy pirate who was basically added there just because of movies like Hook and Cutthroat Island. I mean, really? These horrible Hollywood pirate movies? Nobody cared about pirates anymore by the late 90s, so Namco really effed up with that gimmick. Anyway, the 8-way run system is useless and cheap. The swords and weapons is nothing special because there's no blood or gore, so it's not even realistic. You know, you're cutting up all these enemies, you're using, sharp swords and knives and all these blades. Nobody's getting cut up. Give me a break here. And Soul Calibur completely freaking sucks. Number 3. Street Fighter 2. Initially released for arcades in early 91, Street Fighter 2 The World Warrior was Capcom's crappy sequel to the original Street Fighter from 1987. Where can I begin with this pile of crapcom? Very offensive and racist stereotypes like Dalsim from India, who does nothing but yoga tricks and stretches and yoga fireball attacks. That's not even a martial art or a fighting style. I mean, come on. And then they used this green hairy monster creature named Blanca to represent Brazilians, despite everyone else's country being represented by normal human beings. The Brazilians look like freaking green monster creatures. The gameplay itself sucked so badly because they tried so hard to rip off Mortal Kombat. That's right. Mortal Kombat actually came out first and innovated the fighting style and the fighting game genre with its ideas. You know, you got the energy bar on the top and you got the timer at the middle. Everyone knows Scorpion would spear through Ryu's skull and Sub-Zero would freeze the crap off of Zangief's beard off his face. So, I mean, you got the Mortal Kombat roster completely being able to wipe out the Street Fighter roster if they ever, faced off against each other. So if you want a way better fighting game from the early 90s, get Mortal Kombat instead of pathetic Street Fighter 2. Way more blood, way more violence, way more, gritty action than cartoony Capcom Street Fighter nonsense. Number 4. Mortal Kombat 2 came out in arcades in 1993. Mortal Kombat 2 is one of the most controversial video games of all time for all the wrong reasons. First of all, MK2 basically featured a bunch of characters that you couldn't even play. That's right, you got characters like Sonya Blade or Kano who were available in the first Mortal Kombat, but you can't even play them in the sequel, MK2. Then you had the NPCs like Jade and Noob Saibot and Smoke, who were basically just secret opponents and were basically just pointless bonus fights. You could fight them, but you can't play as them. What the heck is the point of having all these people if you can't use them in the game? That's pathetic midway. And then there's the actual media backlash that MK2 got. It had so much blood, so much gore, and all these very violent finishing moves that, you know, the first Mortal Kombat didn't even have that much gore and shock value. I mean, is this the kind of video games that we should expose to young children? Heck no! Mortal Kombat 2 is a very stiff fighting game with simplistic tap-based moves, and basically it has an over-reliance on violence. That is its main gimmick, and it sucks, and really, Mortal Kombat 2 should have been the last game in the series. Number 5. Tekken 5 came out originally in arcades in 2004 and on the PS2 in 2005. You know, you want to talk about a franchise decline. Tekken used to be big in the 90s, but by the mid-2000s, this pile of crap is the best Namco can offer. Tekken 5 is basically just a ripoff of Tekken Dark Resurrection. Exactly. Especially, you know, you got the stage designs on Tekken 5 and the character roster. I mean, it's basically just inverted, you know? It's like, oh, nighttime stages this time. You know, what used to be a daytime stage is now a nighttime stage, and vice versa. Even the music is basically just a cheap rehash of Tekken Dark Resurrection. Even Tekken 5 is missing characters like Lily and Dragunov and Armor King. I mean, how lame is that? Even on its own, Tekken 5 is just a very plain and terrible fighting game. The graphics are very bland. The stage designs, they look like orangutan orifices, and the gameplay is very shallow. It doesn't even have online, which is just really pathetic by 2005 standards. Give me a break, Namco. Tekken 5 stunk. Number 6. Dead or Alive 4 came out on the Xbox 360 in 2005. This 360 exclusive was the only known fighting game on the brand new Microsoft console in late 2005. Unfortunately, even DOA 4 is hampered down by the horrendous buttons on the Xbox 360 controller. You know, the D-pad is obviously useless, so you're forced to use the analog sticks and awkwardly attempt to sidestep all the half-naked angry women trying to knock you out in swift succession. And that's another huge problem with the DOA series. It has this over-reliance on fan service and sexuality rather than actual strong gameplay or interesting storylines. The game barely has any customizations. The modes are all pretty standard by, you know, early 2005, 2006, and DOA 4 was just, it's so crappy that the series would just not get another sequel for 7 years straight. DOA, more like CRAP. There you go. Number 7. Samurai Shodown came out in arcades initially in 93, but aside from the arcades though, Samurai Shodown was your typical early mid-90s fighting game schlock port over. What am I talking about? It came out on the Genesis, Super Nintendo, Game Boy, Sega Master System, the 3DO, the Game Gear, the Neo Geo CD, and the Sega Mega CD. How many versions of this crap did we need back then? I'm surprised they didn't even release a port for the PC or the Mac or DOS or, you know, Tiger Electronics, cell phone, microwave, dryer, washing machine versions. I mean, aside from being a basic Street Fighter clone with weapons this time, there's nothing special about Shodown, or anything that made it stand out. In Samurai Shodown, you know, the stage designs, they look like any wilderness photographs you have lying around from the early 90s. You know, you got the mountainous region, and you got the trees and the forest and all that. The music is very bland and very simplistic. You can't really hear much. The characters have no personalities. We don't care about half these characters. You can't customize any of them. There's no customization. And the worst part is that there's no online multiplayer. That's right. SNK has no online. They had no online in Samurai Shodown. In freaking 1993? That's like the era of the internet, you know? SNK Haumaru? More like, how could you? Stupid SNK, no frickin' online. Number 8. Virtua Fighter 2 came out in arcades in 94 originally, and then the Sega Saturn in 1995. You know, Sega is not really known for fighting games, but when they decided to basically copy Namco and the Tekken franchise, Sega put out Virtua Fighter as the fighting game exclusive on the home consoles, you know. Almost all the characters are basically lifted off the Street Fighter and the Tekken games, which is really pathetic of Sega to do this, because it's really no wonder that they haven't made a Virtua Fighter game in the past, I don't know, 10 years. They didn't even really do anything much for the 3D video game genre, considering that the graphics in Virtua Fighter 2 look so outdated. You know, the filtered texture mapping makes the rendered 3D characters and environments look like crap. Why this game sold so much is a mystery, because it did sell in the millions back in the mid-90s, but I guess people back then were just so freaking desperate for anything that looked like remotely 3D graphics. We all know, by the way, that the true 3D fighting game champion, it's not Virtua Fighter, it's freaking Rise of the Robots. Number 9. Super Smash Bros. Melee came out on the GameCube in 2001. This was basically developed by the infamous Pink Poopy Droppers HAL Laboratory. Smash Melee was basically the late 2001 sequel to the original 1999 N64 Smash Bros. This time around, though, the GameCube got its share of Melee Mash Fests and crossover mascots in the most disappointing fashion ever. First of all, the stage designs and the graphics still look really bland and lifeless, just like the original N64 version. You know, most of the characters are exactly the same, albeit this time being played on the weird GameCube controller instead of the more comfortable N64 controls, let's be honest here. The available modes in the game are pretty much useless and gimmicky. You got the home run contest, stupid target tests, waste of time, and adventure mode. That's an absolute complete terrible mode, and the all-star mode, which is absolutely worthless. This is your typical overhyped Nintendo casual trash fighter with no thought process or, you know, sense of order in the gameplay. Just pure chaos and lack of exciting one-on-one matches. Everything, it's all about knocking everybody out of the screen, you know, just mindless action instead of actual fighting tactics or using some kind of countering and combo attacks to, you know, win fights in an actual fighting game. This is a glorified beat-em-up that looks like a fighting game because of its aesthetic presentation and style. I mean, that's all there is to it. Smash Bros. Melee, horrible. And coming in, last but not least, number 10, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 came out in arcades in 2000, but for home consoles in later years, perhaps the most overhyped 2D fighting game of the 6th generation. Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is a piece of crapcom caca that should have stayed in the arcades. The Dreamcast, PS2, and the original Xbox all received their versions of the game to varying degrees of reception, but the reality here is that nobody gives a crap about fighting games with no storyline endings. I mean, come on, no storyline endings? Every Marvel vs. Capcom 2 character really has no specific endings, and that's basically been the staple of pretty much every fighter for the past 10 years up to that point. And this lack of focus and plotline presentation totally basically just dismisses any character development and renders nearly every character in the game as filler garbage. they're all just mindless drones. Cheap, toy soldiers for gamers to pick up and mash together like some child playing with his action figures. The experience is reduced to repetitive gameplay of button mashing and cheap flashy effects on screen to wow the dumb casuals. This is basically just an illusionary trick by Capcom to make a shallow experience seem so impressive and graphically captivating, when all you really get is a bunch of tedious unlockables, lackluster music and soundtrack, and empty stage designs. No wonder fighting games perished in the 2000s, all thanks to games like Marvel vs. Capcom 2. And that's it for the top 10 worst fighting games of all time. And hey, you know what? Fighting games, they're pretty much non-existent at this point. They're completely irrelevant, so I mean, these are definitely the top 10 worst games, though. Don't even bother to play or look back on them with any sort of like, oh wow, I can't believe I used to play that. Well, people were a lot simpler back then. Times were more simple back in the 90s and the early 2000s. They don't have amazing games of today. They don't have incredible must-have experiences of today. There was no GTA 5 or, COD Ghosts or, COD Advanced Warfare. We had no amazing, graphically superior games like, something like Minecraft. That stuff wasn't available back then, so it was a pretty sad time for those pathetic, fighting gamers back in the day, and I'm just glad that fighting games are basically finished. That's it for this episode of the True Gamer Top 10, and you know what? This is a true gamer, and a true gamer basically is somebody who doesn't play fighting games. If you play fighting games, you're not a true gamer. You're some pathetic nerd that's, stuck in the past, stuck in the freaking 90s or something. Go play a true game. Go play something like, basically COD. You want to try some COD. You want to try some Destiny. You want to try some Watch Dogs. Those are real games for true gamers. The True Gamer Top 10 is created, performed, and produced by the Review Space channel. Please check him out on youtube.com/thereviewspace. Thank you. Until next time.